All right, welcome to another LSA webinar. Today, busting 5 myths about proximity and location data marketing. I'm Greg Sterling, VP of Strategy for LSA, and with me today is Ramit Kalas, who is with Unacast, who's going to be doing the bulk of the speaking. But before we get into Ramit's presentation, let's go to the next slide. I want to tell you a little bit about our PLACE conference coming up in September. This is really a unique event on location intelligence. We'll be exploring the full range of topics. You can check it out, next slide, at either placeconference.net or thelsa.org/place. And this is where you can check out the agenda, check out who's attending, and so on and so forth. And we're fortunate, next slide, to have CEO of Unacast, Thomas Wale, who's going to be doing one of the featured presentations, Unlocking the Black Box of Location, which is kind of related to our topic today, although it won't be the same content. Next slide, please. Who else is going to be at the PLACE conference? I'm glad you asked that question. A bunch of these companies on the left and many more, and brands and retailers, agencies. We're going to have case studies and very practical discussion about the use of location, location tools, how location is being used in the market and where it's all going. And there are 2 special tactical workshops if you're a media publisher or an agency, and there'll be more information coming about those. Next slide, please. So as a setup to Ramit's presentation, and many of you on the webinar know this, there are a whole bunch of things you can do with location. So people used to think about location as a real-time tool, geofencing, something that was trying to reach audiences within a limited distance from a particular landmark, a point of interest, or store. That's still going on, of course, but you can do a lot more with location, including identifying audiences by their real-world visitation behaviors, in-store attribution, customer insights that come from their offline behavior and their patterns, competitive intelligence, where else do they go in addition to the particular retailer or store or location that is of interest. And then, less well-known but also powerful is offline to online retargeting. So they came into the store. You can also retarget them online for e-commerce purposes. So this is a range of things, and there's more stuff that you can do with location data. It's not all about real time. It's not all about near me. It's about it's really becoming the centerpiece of a lot of marketing, cross-platform marketing, etc. Next slide, please. But there's an opacity here for many people. People don't know about the accuracy of the data. They don't know where the data comes from. They don't know how it circulates through the ecosystem. There are many questions in addition to these sort of great capabilities. There's a lot of uncertainty and some myths that exist around location data. And Ramit is going to tackle those head on. But before I turn it over to him, you can advance the slide. I want to tell you that this entire presentation will be available by Friday. You'll get an email. If you registered for this webinar, you'll get an email with the entire presentation available, a link to the presentation, so you can see it all again or binge watch it 100 times over the weekend, as I'm sure you will be interested in doing after you hear Ramit's excellent presentation. Take it away, Ramit.
Thanks, Greg. Do you hear me fine?
Yes, absolutely.
Very good. Yes, so thank you for the intro. I'm Ramit from Unacast. Unacast is a data company first and foremost, and we are the largest aggregator of location and proximity data. So what are we going to talk about today is first an intro, what's happening in the location space, why is location such a hot topic, why companies are prioritizing location, who is using location, and then we would jump into the common myths regarding location and proximity marketing data. So what's happening right now? There's a couple of great news already from 2017. Snap acquired a great location company called Placed to fill the gap in ad attribution. So when users see an ad and match that back to a store visitation, so you can close the gap for marketers there. Snap as a whole also acquired a company called Zenly to launch the Snap Map. So Snap is taking a real stand in the location space. Foursquare, they launched a great study regarding how can you use location data in the finance industry to see trends, and they reported that Chipotle's traffic or foot traffic has been decreasing before the company released the earnings report, so that was an eye-opener for the financial industry. And then of course a small company called Amazon, they opened up their first shop without no staff, so shop fully equipped with sensors, as well as they acquired a company, Whole Foods. So what the company is doing now is they're looking to acquire even more data, even though they have dominated the online space, and so that they can add data from the real world to further expand their capabilities towards their customers, cross screens, etc. When we look at it from the consumer perspective, a company called Skyhook, a great friend of ours, has released a research where they found that 83% of app users say that location data is crucial to their app experience. At the same time, nearly 40% are hesitant to share their location. So when we look at the statistics that was released by LBMA 6 years ago, the number of users who were willing to share their location was 12 to 15%. And now, 2017, that's up to 60%. So this really shows that when you really have the value in your app, let's say, then people are willing to share their location and information more and more. But again, has to have some value. And when we look at it from the brand's perspective, 25% of marketing budgets are already spent on location-based marketing, and over 50% of the top brands are using location data either for targeting or other use cases that we will cover later on this webinar. So as the location space is heating up, mobile has to evolve as well, right? And Apple has launched a great initiative here where they put more liberty into the user's hands, meaning that Apple is going to launch something called iOS Blue Bar. And this shows users basically a blue bar on top of the screens when apps are actively collecting background location data. So basically, if the app doesn't have a good use case, users will turn it off, and they're always aware that some app is collecting their location data. And then when we look at other trends, much of the location data right now is derived through mobile apps or bit streams. What that means I will explain further down the webinar. But there's also data from mobile carriers and who are also starting to have a good footprint in the industry. Verizon is a good example, as they acquired AOL and Yahoo to essentially turn their data exhaust into ad dollars and allow advertisers to aim ads directly at their subscribers. So why does location matter? It's a rather simple answer because there's limited access to first-party data, and the first-party data is usually sits behind the walled gardens of Facebook's and Google's. So there's only a handful of companies who have the access to login details and first-party data. So then location data is essentially a replacement to that by allowing to understand consumers and how they move around in the world without having access to the sign-in data. So when you are looking to invest in location data, there are a couple of myths that we hear a lot from the market. Even though the location space has come a long way, there are 5 main myths we will cover here in the webinar. And then after the myths, we will have a Q&A section where you can ask further questions. So starting with the first one, location and proximity data are the same thing. That's what we hear quite a bit. when you think about location data, you should think about more as a macro view of a user. So you can pinpoint the user to a certain area, let's say a city or even a state. But when we talk about proximity, that's where you can pinpoint a user or device into a specific venue. When we talk about proximity technologies, it's usually beacons, Wi-Fi, NFC, data points such as the dwell time, check-in data, point of sale data, or GPS data gathered from an SDK level, meaning directly from apps. And when we talk about location, it's usually about cell tower triangulation or ad calls from the mobile. So what that means is when a user gets served an ad, the phone spins up the GPS and sends out the lat long when that ad was served to a user. So when you're looking to acquire data, you essentially should focus on these questions: that is this provider able to acquire data that fits your needs, and are they able to give you granular enough data that fits your use case? And in addition, are they able to provide you transparency into the confidence level of each signal? Moving on to myth 2, it's a bit related. So proximity and location data is all sourced the same way. So most of the location data available right now is from bit streams, so from the same way that a user gets served an ad, that phone spins up to GPS. And the other source is from SDKs, so directly from apps. SDK means a software development kit, which is essentially a piece of code that is saying to apps that either collect background or foreground GPS data, or collect data from when interacting with beacons or Wi-Fi or NFC. And again, both sources are viable. It really depends on your use cases. Do you want to pinpoint the user to a very specific venue, or are you fine by having a broader area of the user? So myth 3 is also a bit related, and that we hear a lot, that all the GPS data is the same. And this is where I want to go into depth a bit about the collection. So while I spoke about that most of the GPS data is collected via bit streams, there are a lot of concerning accuracy problems with this method, mainly because when the GPS gets spinned up by the bit call, it will only send one interaction, so it doesn't have usually enough detail, and it's often the lat long from the phone is cached, or you have a bad reception and it will show out the wrong lat long. So meaning in practice that you might end up with a lat long that was gathered 30 minutes ago. So that data is absolutely inaccurate, and you have very little use case for such data. But the other source or the preferred method, if you really need to pinpoint a user to a specific venue, is gathering GPS data from apps. So whether it's foreground, meaning that you gather the lat longs only when the user is using an app, or it's background, that it constantly collects data points. So in that way, it's a lot easier to validate the GPS signal. You can start to measure dwell time. You can start to see that whether this user actually was in a specific venue or they were just driving by. And moving on to myth 4, proximity and location deck violates privacy. This is a rather sensitive topic, and rightfully so, because some of the players have been toying with the boundaries of being too intrusive or sharing too much information. And as I mentioned before, Apple has already released something called the Apple Blue Bar to give more ownership for the users, as well as in the new iOS, app developers have to ask that. So previously, you only had an option that an app can collect location data always or never, and then the new iOS, you will have an additional option that only while using always and never. So users can really be in control when and how do they share location data. And again, if you are looking to invest into location data or acquire location data, you need to make sure that you understand how the provider collects it in terms of, is there user opt-in or is there not? When we talk about Bitstream, there usually isn't. When we talk about on app level, there usually is a user opt-in that they have allowed to gather the location data. And then jumping on the myth number 5, which is the last one before we jump into the Q&A. And this is where I will stop a bit longer. Usually when we hear about location data, people think about retargeting. So targeting people who have been into a specific venue within an X amount of periods. While it's true that it's the lowest hanging fruit with location data to target devices that have been to specific venues, having such capabilities have proven to increase the campaign results, but there are some use cases that it's hard to use location data alone in a silo to target people. For example, when you are running a CPG campaign for, let's say, dog food, having only or targeting only people that have been to big box retailers doesn't really make sense, because you have no further insight if this user is actually interested in dog food or not. So there are actually other use cases that we see more and more where raw or regular location data is being used for. One is attribution, so that is the same reason that Snap acquired Placed, so that you can actually match the ad impression to a store visit, and you can then measure the success of your campaign. The second one is audience modeling, and when we go back to the targeting part, targeting that same user with a dog creative doesn't make sense, but when you look at the visitation pattern of a user, let's say you see that this user has previously been to a dog park or go there regularly, then it makes more sense to target that user with a certain creative. So really looking at the visitation pattern and taking decisions how to make your segments. Thirdly, there's cross-device. So those of you who don't know what a device graph is, it means that Romet owns an iPhone as well as a computer, and then it matches me to those both devices. And how these companies use location data is basically filtering out false negatives and from visitation patterns, and then it enables them to build a more accurate device graph connecting people to devices. And fourth is data verification. So when we talked about there's a lot of accuracy problems with Bitstream data. There are location-savvy companies out there that are using location data that is gathered from more deterministic methods and comparing that against Bitstream data to make sense and filter out inaccuracies and fraudulent data. And the two final ones are predictive analytics. So this is where you use the previous customer visitation pattern to predict where are they going next and when. And finally, it's foot traffic analytics. So understanding foot traffic into certain locations and venues has immense value for, as mentioned previously, financial industry, as well as brick and mortar stores to plan where to open the next stores, and as well as city planning to know how people move about in the city. So that was it. Now it's time for Q&A.
Okay, thank you, Romet. There was a lot of information in there delivered pretty quickly. If people have questions, they can submit them. I want to ask a sort of a very, ask Romet some very practical questions about how you negotiate and navigate all this data. But along those lines, accuracy continues to be an issue. Some people are unaware of it as an issue. There was this sort of development in the industry where people discovered you could do all this stuff with location, and then it came out that a lot of the location data coming out of the bid stream was wildly inaccurate, and then there was some confusion. How do people, media buyers, agencies, brands, understand what they're buying? So in other words, there's all this kind of representation of audiences and use cases. How do they evaluate it? How do they know that they're actually getting what they're buying? What are the things they should look for?
That's a great question, and that has been a very hot topic recently, actually, that we hear from the market as well. And so the difference is there are some companies out there that will deliver you. Let's say, Greg, you come to me, you need a segment that you want to target people who have been into McDonald's, and then I will feed you back basically the IDs, and you would have to trust me that these are really the people who have been into McDonald's, and you would have to use that. Where we see the industry trending towards is sharing more of the raw location data, as well as you mentioned that there are some inaccuracies and different confidence levels and different technologies that yield different signals. So then you can assign basically a value of confidence level, that how sure you were that this user actually was in this venue. And being transparent like that helps the agencies and whoever is looking to acquire location data take the decisions on their own, that how certain do they need to be to target their audience.
So what you're saying is it does, but just to clarify, what you're saying then is that there's going to be some confidence score essentially assigned to particular location data points. I mean, how is that reported?
Exactly. So when you deliver again segments from a black box, it's impossible for let's say an agency to verify that this is actually true. When you sit on a lot of location data, when you work with different signals, you can really start to see the trends and then rate or put a confidence level on that data point. And then that's the part where the agencies can take the decisions on their own when they have transparency into the data itself.
Okay. Are there are a lot of vendors who are making similar representations about capabilities out in the market. So, as an agency or a brand who wants to deal with some of this stuff, you're going to talk to 10 companies or more who are going to say, we've got the same capabilities, we can deliver the same kinds of value, the same kinds of information. This is a similar question. How do you evaluate the different companies? What is the process that one should use or could use to make a determination of who to work with?
Right. So that's a really good question, Craig. One thing is, of course, first asking their capabilities in a structured way, right? You have to ask the same questions from all of those players, and in a lot of different cases, you might see that all of these companies answer yes to a lot of the same questions. At the end of the day, the best way to evaluate a data provider when you're looking at a location data provider is to run some kind of a test. So if you can get your hands on to some kind of a deterministic data set that you know 100% sure is the truth, and then you can start to measure all the location providers against this truth set. So I'd say that's the best way to evaluate when you are looking location data providers.
So on the myth number 5 slide and in my earlier slides, there's a bunch of use cases: attribution, audience modeling, foot traffic, predictive analytics. Give me a scenario involving predictive analytics. How is that being used? What is the use case for predictive analytics beyond the fact that I'm going to understand what the visitation pattern is going to be for a particular individual or collection of individuals in an audience segment? How would that be deployed in a marketing context, if you have a practical example?
Right. So there is one company that is pretty advanced in that is one of our clients, and then what they do is they look at the visitation patterns. Let's bring it down to a single person level, then it's easier to explain. Let's say Romet goes to McDonald's 4 times a month each month. So thank God I don't do that in reality, but let's say I do, right? So then you can start to see throughout the year that Romet really goes to the McDonald's 4 times a month, and now it's a time where Romet hasn't been to McDonald's 4 times a month. So I'm very probable to go into McDonald's. next. So it's a very good user to target your loyalty campaigns against or your creative against. Did that make sense?
Right, and it would, but it wouldn't be on an individual basis. It would be on an aggregate level. You would everybody who looked like Rummet.
Exactly.
But yeah, right. Fit the audience profile that you
right. So the first criteria is you will lay your basically your criteria. Who do you want to see and what kind of visitations do you want to see, and then you will lay it on top of the raw data and then take it from there.
So if I'm a media buyer, an agency, a brand, and I really have not worked with this kind of data in the past, or I've understood it entirely as real-time geofencing, but I haven't really done anything very sophisticated with it, what is the process? How do I translate these abstract ideas into practice? What is the next step for me?
So one thing you could do is email rummet.colors so essentially there's a lot of good materials out there, and also if someone has any questions how to proceed or how to look at location data, how to evaluate location data players, we're happy to answer. But yeah, beyond that, it really depends. Like, you should first define what are you looking to do with location. As always, so location is not the magical answer to anything, right? You really need to define what are you looking to do, and then consult that if location data is able to really solve your pain point.
Well, so what pain points on that point? What pain points does location data not solve? Give us some use cases or some scenarios where it's not going to really be helpful. Just a quick sense of that.
You're putting me on a spot, Greg.
Okay, I didn't mean to do that. Anyway, but I was, you don't hear people say that actually. I mean, typically people are making the case that this is stuff that can actually, it's a cookie substitute. It's a source of real world behavioral insight. How does this real-world data get married to other data sets for cross-device purposes, for path-to-purchase analysis, or for identifying users who may be moving between devices? How does that happen? Describe that.
Right. So the easiest way to make that match is essentially all of our mobile devices have something called the ad ID. So whether on Apple's case it's IDFA, or on Google's case it's the Google ad ID. And if you have other information on that ad ID, then that is the quickest and the fastest way. It is also possible, let's say you are a mobile web player, you don't have access to the mobile ad ID. It's possible to match the cookie identifiers that you have on your web visitors to the real world interactions through the ad ID. So it's possible to make the match from cookie to the ad ID.
And you can also match IDs, mobile device IDs, with IP addresses to verify that you're dealing with somebody who's in a household, in a home, for cross-device targeting purposes. Correct?
Exactly. So yeah, so a lot of cross-device companies actually use the IP address as an identifier, and often you also get that IP address from the SDK level as well when you are collecting location data. So then it's, again, an easy way to make the match.
So sort of zooming back out, you've identified 5 myths and some sub-issues here. What is the most common misperception or misunderstanding around location data that you encounter among your colleagues, customers, partners, or people that you work with in the world?
I guess the first question that always comes is regarding privacy, and which is a very good thing. So people are asking questions that how is the data acquired? Isn't it like if there is no opt-in, it's creepy, etc. So it's very good that people are asking these kinds of questions, and all the recent initiatives from different players are gearing towards opt-in basis data, etc. So the users are really in control. But privacy is definitely the number one thing regarding location data right now.
Yeah, and we have just another shameless plug. We have a dedicated privacy session with folks from the Future of Privacy Forum who will be speaking specifically to best practices and what marketers need to understand about privacy at the Place conference on September 18. It's an issue that people often don't want to talk about because they see it as legalistic or boring, but it's a really critical issue that ultimately goes to the user experience and whether you're successful getting people to opt in or use location in the background.
Exactly.
Yeah. Give me a couple of, we've talked a lot about kind of abstract ideas, a few practical examples. Give me maybe the most common practical use cases for location that you see in the market, that your customers and others that you're working with are actually using. What are a couple of different examples? How is this data being used as a real world matter?
Sure. So definitely the main use case that we see from our clients is audience modeling. So making advanced custom segments based on where people go about in the real world. And then in some cases, they're even able to match their online inventory towards their offline activities. So that's where it gets really interesting. I would say next from audience modeling is definitely attribution. So people are thinking, or the industry is moving more towards return on investment, right? Not just measuring click rates, etc., because that's not really a good metric to measure. So really being able to prove that the ad campaign was success, it really resulted in foot traffic. Yeah, definitely those two are the main use cases.
So in conferences that I attend, I often talk about the inevitability of offline attribution as a critical part of marketing campaigns, and people that haven't been exposed to it or aren't starting to work with it are really sort of behind the curve, and that ultimately offline attribution, where that's relevant to the business, is going to be a must-do. Whether or not the business model changes, but what's your sense of how many marketers are working with offline attribution? Because my sense is that even though companies like Google and Facebook are starting to make it more widely available, it's not widely utilized today. What's your sense of the penetration?
No, it's definitely not widely used, and just the simple truth is it's hard, right? There's so much different location signals, so much as things that we need to overcome in terms of fraudulent data, like we spoke about bitstream data, right? So it's definitely in the early stages, I would say, in the industry right now.
Although Google says something, I think they put out a stat the other day that said it was like I want to say 5 billion in the several years that they've been testing store visitation. 5 billion global store visits, which is quite a few. I mean, that's one company, but it's a lot of offline visitation being utilized. Let me ask you a question about the audience modeling, the audience segmentation. So how many? I mean, I guess this is going to vary, but when do you know with confidence that if I want fast food enthusiasts, or I want auto intenders, or I want young parents,
right,
or I want some segment, how long do you have to look at those audiences before you have confidence that that's that yes, I know that that's a fast food eater, somebody who's Ramit's going to McDonald's 4 times a month? How much time has to pass in order for you to get confidence that this is in fact the kind of person you're looking for?
Right. That's a good question, and it depends on a lot of different factors, mainly on technology, right? Let's say if it's a really deterministic source like beacons, I can easily say in a second that, yeah, Greg was in a McDonald's. When we are talking about, let's go to the other way, to the other extreme, when we talk about GPS data in a really dense area, then you really need either additional data points, or you can't be 100% confident that Greg actually went to the McDonald's in this dense New York City area. And then that's what you do, right? You attach the lower confidence level to that signal and just provide this information to the marketing company or agency or whatever, so that they can take the decision on their own. Because in some cases, it's still enough when you know that this user was actually very near to this store, so they didn't even go in, but that they're still probable to visit your store if it's on their way to work or whatever.
But as a practical matter, the media buyer or the agency or the brand is going to ask for an audience. I want to see my customers, and I want to see my main competitors' customers, and I want to see the visitation patterns. They'll ask for the audience, and then the vendor will try and define that audience using location and come back to them and say, we found these people. But it still remains a black box for the buyer or for the brand for the most part.
Right, but it's only in the case if you deliver the segments out of a black box, right? Alternative is to give them the raw data itself, so they can see each visitation patterns. And these days, a lot of agencies and a lot of the companies that we are talking to have their own data scientist teams, etc. So they will be able to take decisions in their own team in terms of making the custom segments. So it's really giving the liberty to the clients.
But you have to have a data scientist on staff in order to interpret that.
Usually, yeah. If you're talking about working with raw location data, you usually need to have a data team, yes.
And what do they get in that context? Are they getting just lat longs, or are they getting something more than that?
It depends on the data feed, right? In the most popular data feed, you will get a lat long, a timestamp, a dwell time, how much a user was there. You will get the confidence level in terms of how confident that this visit actually took place. You will have the IP address, and it's all tied to the device identifier, which is the ad ID.
So I want to ask you a question about beacons, because there's the hype cycle chart that I think it's a Gartner thing, but I'm not sure. Where a new technology enters the market, and then there's a lot of hype and excitement, a lot of projections about adoption, and then there's some inevitable disappointment, and then it returns, in some kind of more gradual but practical ramp up.
Right.
So beacons obviously were overhyped, and then everybody was disappointed by them. And now, give us a sense of what's going on with beacons. I know it's one of several proximity technologies, including Wi-Fi, including NFC, near-field communications, and other different technologies. But what's happening today, and where do you see it? Where do you see beacons going in the next short-term, 12 to 18 months?
Right. So
in terms of these cases.
Yes, you're definitely right that there was beacons were overhyped. I absolutely agree with that, and we see a steady growth, but it's steady, and where we think the beacons will find the most rapid growth is actually in the industrial field, right? In asset tracking, there's a lot of companies doing great stuff there. And yeah, so when we speak about beacons, we initially started out also only focusing on beacons, but we quickly realized that when you really want to get a whole picture of what's happening in the real world, focusing only beacons it's not going to be enough. So you need to work with all the possible location signals out there.
So that's quite interesting. You're saying that it's in an industrial sort of B2B user scenarios, asset tracking, where people are going to see the highest levels of beacon deployment and utilization. So, when I started the PLACE conference in 2013, it was all about indoor location, smart lighting, beacons, and other technologies, blue dot navigation, and now it seems like indoor technology has really, it's growing with smart lighting and other things like that, but but we haven't seen the interesting scenarios that were projected in the beginning. We haven't really seen a lot of great indoor marketing or merchandising scenarios. What's your take on that? What are you seeing in the market? Are you seeing anybody doing anything interesting with indoor location?
So indoor location is definitely still still the future, and we believe that very much. And exactly to your point, sensors will happen, whether it's beacon or another sensor that is able to communicate with your device. But where the scale comes from is exactly what you just said. It's coming from when the sensors itself are going to be integrated into, let's say, lighting or into other devices, right? And another interesting thing that has just happened recently was that NFC got opened up towards the developer community, right? Now you can build a lot of interesting use cases on top of NFC. And when we talk about NFC as a data source, that is a very deterministic data source because the range of the technology is in centimeters, right?
So just a couple of final questions before we let everybody go. You talked early on about Verizon and the carrier involvement, with purchasing AOL and Yahoo, and now having a sort of an ad platform in addition to carrier location. I've heard people debate the merits of carrier location because it's essentially cell tower triangulation. I mean, some people make the assumption the carrier mobile location is going to be superior to others, and some people dispute that. What's the reality of Verizon location data versus other sources?
I mean, on a cell tower alone, I agree with you that it's maybe not sufficient. So in order for them to really succeed within the location space, they would have to look at other signals as well. So I agree with you. The cell tower data alone is definitely not enough to identify the real granular data, how people move about.
And so on that point, is sort of a related question is there's a debate about first-party location versus third-party location, and acquisitions are happening because people want to get a hold of first-party location in addition to third-party location for the bid stream, given the problems. I hear companies say, well, we get our location data from the bid stream, but then we discard 80% of it.
Right.
We clean it, we get rid of 80% of it. What would you say about the first-party versus third-party location debate? I mean, I heard you say that both are important, but where do you come down? Is that something that buyers should be looking at? Or I only want to work with somebody that's got first-party location, or is there a more nuanced understanding, and how should people think about that distinction?
I mean, it all comes down to trust and transparency, right? The only reason why people need first-party data is that if they're not the location-savvy company, it comes down to that they are not able to verify that if Greg is actually selling me what he's selling me, right? That's the difference between the first party and third party, right? If you are able to be or provide transparency into the data feeds, we believe and we already see that happening, that companies are fine by acquiring third party data. But it's definitely a growing trend to have first-party data for companies, just for the reasons of trust.
So I think for the final question, and you can say anything you want to the audience about summary or takeaways or things that they need to think about going forward. But I want to just ask about third-party verification. So there were a number of announcements that were clustered together earlier this year, one of them from XED, which is now Ground Truth, one of them from a company called Retail, and there was a third, which is escaping me right now, around a pay-per-visit business model, cost per visit. So taking the cost per click or the performance-based model of online marketing and translating that into you're only going to pay for actual visitors to your store. And I think that that's a fascinating model, and that's one of the sessions at the Place conference, shameless plug. But what I wanted to ask you is, in those announcements, the company Place that was acquired by Snap, right, was doing third-party verification. So they were verifying to the buyer, to the brand, or to the agency that in fact the user had shown up in the particular location, the store, whatever. Do you see that as a model going forward in the same way that we have viewability and other third-party brand safety and verification for online? Do you see this as a standard thing happening as an alternative to providing the raw data to the brand or to the company, that some third party will be out there verifying that the store visit actually happened, or whatever the designated event is actually took place? This is the audience that you think you're buying. This is the store visit. What is your thought on that?
I definitely believe that will happen, but the problem there, or the challenge rather, is that company would have to sit on a lot of different location signals in order to truly verify if the data that they're getting in is real or not. So it will happen, but the question is when, basically, from my end.
So hazard a guess. How is that? A year from now, 2 years from now? What's the time frame that you see that happening in?
If I have to put a time frame here, Greg, I'd say 2-3 years.
Okay. So I think that's all the questions that we want to ask today. Why don't you tell the audience, sort of final remarks. What's most important for them to understand, or what should they take away from your presentation beyond the contacting you for more information?
I guess just the encouragement is to just ask a lot of questions from the location data providers, and if there are any red flags towards transparency, or if there are any questions that they're not able to answer, that's probably a bad thing. So ask as much as possible, and when you're looking to evaluate a player, include other players so that you can get true measurement against the companies.
Okay, and with that, I would like to thank everybody for attending. This is an important space. Keep watching, attend the Place conference, keep reading, and feel free to reach out to us for any follow-up or additional information that you need. And thank you very much, Ramit, for taking the time to educate everybody today. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Greg. Have a nice day, everyone.